This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Southampton Academy coach Keaton Wood. He discusses his passion for defending and how he transmits this to the players, some of the technical detail behind defending, such as which foot to use when closing down in wide areas, as well as his transition from former player into coaching and some of the challenges along the way. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Keith, appreciate you jumping on kind of last minute, mate. Saved me a little bit from a dropout with someone not very well. I know we're both a bit conscious of the dogs making a sound during this podcast, so we'll see which one goes first. But how are you? Are you all okay?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for bringing me on board and stuff. I'm an avid listener as it is, so I'm happy to be here.
Good. Well, yeah, glad to hear a listener. Make sure you share it with friends, as I say to everyone. So for the people that maybe don't know your background, etc., do you just want to explain, I guess, where you are at the moment, and then I guess a brief summary of how you've got to that point?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Keaton Wood. I'm currently the under-10s coach at Southampton Football Club in their academy. Been coaching now for coming up 5 years this October, all at the football club. Sort of before that, football's always been a part of my life, although coaching probably not so much. I'm quite new to it. So all my coaching years have been at the club. So really got into the academy football side about 15 at Palace, then progressed through at Millwall, did my scholarship, and then gained a year's pro, and then gained another year's pro after that. So 2 years pro at Millwall. And then sort of from there, was going to do my UEFA B, got some first team like sub appearances and stuff like that, and then it didn't work out as I thought it was going to. And luckily, with my head screwed on, I decided to do that UEFA B, and then from there, got an internship at the club after a summer of sort of doing odd coaching stuff here and there, and then working in school for 6 weeks, and had an internship, and then haven't really looked back since. I sort of moved from back home in Kent, and I'm still going now, so I must have done something all right.
No, it's interesting. Obviously, I know you, and we spoke before about your passion for defending. I'm guessing those roots are well set in Millwall and being combative and wanting to get the ball out of the net. So we'll definitely touch on to that. I guess the first question for you off the back of that is, how was that transition for you? Because as you said, you've done it from quite a young age in terms of going from playing into coaching. And I think what's interesting there is you said about having your head screwed on. A lot of players that leave the game at younger age groups maybe don't have a plan B, etc., and just focus on plan A. So how was that transition for you, and what made you kind of understand that you needed to have other options around playing?
Yeah, so I've always been sort of a leader or the captain of my teams, whether that be football or any other sort of sport that I did. I always did them growing up, and I really enjoyed all sport. I've always sort of coached indirectly. So whether that be just going up the park and playing with older lads or girls or whoever, and then there'll be little ones there playing with you as well, and always helping them. I've always had quite a good joy of helping, especially children out, sort of even family dues and stuff like that. So I've got a passion for being with children and stuff. And then sort of doing my level 2 at Millwall, I really liked it. And sort of people told me, you've got a bit of a knack for it, Keaton. And I thought, okay, there's maybe something there for maybe you to continue. And then I sort of wanted to do my UEFA B when I got my pro contract, but I thought, no, let's really kick on this year. They wanted to give me a 2-year pro, but I said, no, I want to earn my second year. So just give me 1 year, and I want to prove to myself that I can do it. So I gave a year to my playing, and then I thought, okay, let's look to start my second year and take coaching from there. And I guess it was more about, look, I'm good at this. I'm good at leading people and helping people. It's going to help my football. That was always my intention. That it maybe wasn't a plan B, although it was a good idea to have that in my back pocket. But at the same time, if I can understand how a coach works, how can I do that for my teammates and sort of lead from there? And as I said, I just really enjoyed it. So professional club, you might finish at 2, 3 o'clock. Why not go and do something else and develop and learn and get out of your comfort zone? That was pretty something for me that I did. And it just so happened that after some appearances on the subs bench for Millwall, that I sort of got, in the space of 4 days, I was on the bench, and then I was told I wasn't getting a new contract. I was picked up and dropped, really quickly. And luckily enough, I'd been accepted on the PFA course in the summer, my UEFA B, and sort of didn't really look back from there, as it were. But the journey from then to Southampton was probably two months, 2 and a bit months maybe, and that was definitely a transition. So yeah, it was hard, it was tough.
So talk about that transition. What was that like? What were some of the steps for you?
So I didn't quite know. I knew that so luckily I was playing non-league at Dartford on loan straight away, and I knew that they were a really good non-league club, and I really enjoyed it there. So I was sort of wanting to just finish up the season, get my head around what I wanted to do come in September. I wanted to play non-league, but I wanted to go into coaching because I want to be in football. Now, I had some really good friends help me out in terms of Steve Salis, who was head of education at the time, sort of talked to me and helped me along, and he put me in touch with Harry Watlin at Millwall, who's under 14s coach, and he's now head coach of Hartford Athletic in the UCL out there in the US, and or USL Champ, I should say. And at the time, he still does now, has a college sort of scheme and also a school scheme as well. So come September, I sort of went into that and helped him out with working with 18s, and I must have done that for about 6 weeks, helping out of schools, just general PE stuff. And then I went on to LinkedIn looking for some more work because it wasn't enough. And Ben Bartlett, at the time FA tutor now over at Fulham, he came on my UEFA B course in the summer in July for a couple of days. So I must have made some sort of impression. He sort of put me in touch with Ed Heed, who was head of coaching at the time at Saints. And within 2 weeks, I was shipped up and moved down to Southampton, 150 miles from home. Never lived on my own, didn't know what council tax was or anything like that, and had to grow up quick. And at the same time, I was still playing at Dartford, so 3 times a week I was going back and forth from Dartford, training and playing, getting in at maybe 1, 2 a.m. in the morning, waking up at 6 to get down to the training ground. At that time, I'd probably say my identity was I was still a player whilst learning coaching. And now I'd probably say I've transitioned to definitely being a coach now, especially with my knee injury and stuff. But I had to grow up quick. I was a sponge at the time in those sort of first year, as it were, just really soaked up everything, tried to get involved as much as possible whilst also juggling my football, and it was tough. But there probably wasn't a better place to learn than at Saints, and they sort of throw you in the deep end and give you loads of support and challenge, which was great. I'm sort of that character anyway. Throw me in the deep end, see what happens. If I need some help, I'll ask for it. I'm not shy for that. I've got no ego or pride, I'd like to say. So coming from only playing football, then coaching football, probably the transition was a bit easier because the schedules are quite the same. It was all the other stuff, the adult stuff of having to live by myself and finding a flat and things like that, which was tough.
So obviously moving into Southampton, as you said there, it's quite well renowned for production of youth players, etc. What was the first thing that struck you compared to maybe some of the other environments that you'd granted played in, but what was the differences or similarities that you saw?
So there's always that argument now of you give kids everything or do you make them earn it? And at Saints, I'll say we probably supply them with world-class facilities, but they do have to earn it. And I'm the character that probably motivated by having the best stuff and wanting to be the best. Views on that are right or wrong, I don't know, but that's how I sort of am. And that's what struck me was the investment in youth, whether that be, or it could be as simple as we've got carpets in some places and places with no carpets, and you play on the bottom pitches and work your way up. So there was always a will for people to want to get better and earn your place. And also, people think there's a secret ingredient for Saints, and the fact that they produce so much. And I was probably going in there with that prejudice of there's got to be something here, there's a secret. What is it? And to this day, I still can't figure it out. I don't know what it is. I think the place just breeds good people when they hire good people and there's a good culture. That people care about football, one, but they also probably care more about children. And I think that's something that's really massive. We all care about each other. We want people to develop and do better. But we have a real passion for working with children and wanting kids to achieve their dreams. That's probably as simple, maybe as organic as it is. So the big thing for me was there was no surprise. It was just a place that loved playing football, coaching football.
Yeah, no. When I get asked that question, I answer the same answer. Is there's good people that care, and then a pathway. I think when you have those two things that align, you're naturally going to produce players, which is good. So obviously you mentioned that kind of starting with the UEFA B, etc., with the idea was that it would help you in a playing context. So, and you hear it all the time where older people say, if I knew then what I knew now whilst I was playing, I would have been a hell of a player. What did it teach you? What things did you learn about, I guess, the craft of coaching sessions or the principles behind the game that you were then, granted it was a short period of time, I know you said the thing, but when you're playing it like Dartford, etc., what were you able to learn that transferred across?
Probably how tough it is to actually put sessions on that produce the outcomes that you really want. So it gave me a lot more patience with coaches, and it really taught me a lot how to deal with players and attitudes. So what was really nice on the PFA was that you do it with quite big characters and things. So I'd like Titus Bramble and there with me, so I got to pick his brains quite a lot and things like that. And it probably taught me that patient side and the fact that if you really want to produce and really want to help players, it's about as much as what you put into it. So I was probably able to dig out what it was about coaches that made them good a lot better to help me, which I can then use to help my teammates around, if that makes sense. So, for example, probably my idol coach at the time and still one of my favourite coaches I've ever had was David Livermore at Millwall. And his level of detail was amazing. That really resonated with me. But some of my other teammates didn't quite like that. So it made me help to understand people better, what made them tick, how to talk to people. And I guess the more exposure you have to that, the more you understand it. It put me on the path. Like, I didn't know much about coaching. I was the youngest on there by a lot. I didn't really know anything about coaching. I threw myself in the deep end. I just learned really quickly from a lot of people. And by the time November came, I was the first one sort of signed off and raring to go. At that time, Saints also put me on another UEFA B to get my youth module. So I'm essentially done 2 in the end. But yeah, it was probably the patience with people and the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, and how tough it is to actually translate something on the pitch into practices to make them specific to what you want. It probably opened up my eyes a bit more to that, a bit more patience.
And you obviously mentioned David Livermore there and spoke about him maybe having a particularly prominent role in terms of your development. Is there any particular interaction that you had with him that stands out as a real learning moment during your playing days?
Not particularly. It was probably just around looking at his practice. Because I still even now find designing practice quite tough. So the 11v11, I feel like that's where I can really do well, and it's breaking that down. So my brain just wants to complicate everything, and it's how just different. It was probably just for a lot of people how different brains can simplify things, and I've come so far in 5 years of keeping things simple, and actually I'm working with kids now, but that's arguably better. If it's relatable to the pitch and looks like the game, then that you've probably done enough, and it's just about how you as a coach put your stance on it and your identity on it. I wouldn't say there's particularly anything I can think of off the top of my head. It was a bit of a while ago now, so as you can probably tell, nothing really sticks out.
No, that's fine. I think that it's always interesting. Like coaches, sometimes it's just the generic way that they interact with you. And you might not be one specific moment at times, but you recognize that individual either resonated with you or didn't resonate with you. I think we hear a lot about the ones that don't resonate, and maybe not so much on the ones that do.
He just showed a level of care probably that I just enjoyed. He understood me, as I said, about the detail and stuff and how I tick. So I think we just got on. And maybe that's probably overlooked in coaching, especially in professional sport. If you get on with somebody, it's a really good foundation.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes whether in your coaching pairs or coaching teams, the need for diversity of thought or characters is probably a big one. I think if you surround yourself with people that are very same, you're probably not getting to all aspects of the players, particularly at the performance level. If you can get a team that, some are highly motivated, highly strung, others are maybe a bit more relaxed, hopefully across your team, you're going to have a group of people that can interact well with the individuals on your team, because naturally they're all going to be different and have different challenges and just act in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I think at Saints, if you put all Saints coaches in a room and got other people to look at you, they could probably pick out which ones are the Saints coaches. We all have these similar traits. But when you go into the detail and you get to know people a bit better, like they are different. It probably sounds quite cliche, but people have different interests, different approaches to things. Some people are harsh, some people are softer, some people have a bit more of a joke, some people, sterner. But we have that underlying trait that we care, and as you say, the club has a pathway.
Yeah, 100%. So obviously, what you mentioned previously, and we discussed a little bit off air, is your, I guess, leaning towards the defensive side of the game. Now you're a man after my own heart, because I'm 100% with you on this. I think it's a dying breed of player that likes to defend properly and whatnot. So I guess the first question is why, and then the next question is, what are you doing to try and, I guess, really improve yourself and solidify your coaching methods within this space?
Why is, so this is something I've always had a passion for since I was young. The why at the moment, turning into coaching, is I'm not particularly too sure as to what that looks like. Why as a coach? All I know is why as a player I really enjoyed it. So I really enjoyed. Don't get me wrong, I love on the ball stuff. And if you've seen me play before being a centre half, you wouldn't think I really loved probably defending as much as I love being on the ball. But I love the nitty gritty side of stuff, and I think I really enjoyed finding out people when they're up against it. Now, for some reason, my brain, when you're 3-0 down, my brain could figure out, which players had the character to keep on going and sort of play for a bit of pride rather than anything else. And I really enjoyed finding out which people have my back. Sounds really simple, but I love heading, I love blocking, I love the whole fact that I used to be called like the dream killer. Like that was my nickname. Like, it's because I just love diving in front of strikers who think they're going to come and score 2 hat tricks against me, and I'm there to stop them. Then go, no, you're all right. You sit down. I'll take it from here. I love the battle. I'm not the tallest, but I could always jump and things like that. I love that. I'm maybe not the biggest or strongest as well, but very rarely did people get the better of me. That's probably as a playing identity. I just loved it for the simple reasons of maybe taking the ball in the face every now and then. And as a coach, I'm sort of trying to translate that into how can I get my kids to enjoy it as much as I do. So some simple stuff I sort of do is just talk about defending with a load of passion. They see a lot of passion with me about defending, and it comes out naturally. You can probably tell from how I'm talking now. Hopefully that translates to how they should feel and the emotional connection that we can have. So it's quite a new adventure, but I'm sort of doing the really cliche stuff of listening to podcasts, see if I can find anything, reading as much as I can, literally doing what my kids do on YouTube of finding their favourite players, finding traits. So like I used to love Baresi and Maldini. I think we all probably would if we looked at defending. And what is it that make them excellent? I haven't got probably a definite answer on that, but sort of doing that sort of stuff. One sort of challenge I'm doing at the moment is giving myself 5 minutes, sort of 3 times a day, just to draw up a load of practices. as I said, drawing practice and coming up practice is something I find quite challenging. So forcing myself to be uncomfortable with coming up with challenges, coming up with these practices, defending defensively, and then sort of critiquing those after the 5 minutes, making sure I do stick to those 5 minutes, because then my brain can start going other places. I might come up with 20, I might come up with 5, and ones that I think have got potential, I sort of store away and then look to maybe progress those a little bit and sort of write around what is it. Sort of looking at practices from a different angle of, I coach the opposite. So when we always do sort of attacking stuff at Saints, I look at, okay, defensively, how can I make this really tough for the attacker? My brain sort of approaches the opposite first.
Have you got any examples of that?
Off the top of my head, so it might be sort of, we're looking at a specific move of the week, and I think, okay, that if you're doing a scissors, for example, you probably want to look at, it's got to be some sort of fake in there. The attacker wants to go one way to the other. Okay, defensively, how am I going to stop that from happening? So I might want to put, if they want to go one way, but I probably want to show them the other way. So I might put the defender on an angle. I might look at, okay, what area of the pitch I'm sort of going to do this in. So how would a centre-back defend this? Or how would a full-back defend this? It's probably stuff that everybody does, but I tend to do that probably straight away rather than go and look at the move of the week or whatever it might be, what sort of specific thing we're looking at. But that's something as well that I'm sort of, with my coaching identity, I'm sort of coming up with, okay, what is it about practice? How do I functionally go through making up a practice? Because a lot of times I don't just turn, I have an idea, I go, I'll put that down, and I look at it and I go, this isn't working. I'm quite a person to realise something isn't working and then get there in the end, sort of thing. Not really anything specific, it just, I've always found it easier to coach the opposite. So yeah, and then some other stuff that I'm sort of doing is just trying to put my knowledge out there on my sort of Twitter, just put myself out there as to why, because there's not many defensive coaches. I know that at Saints we're sort of doing it, and England do it, where they have specific coaches, specific roles, and it's quite big in American football, isn't it? And we're sort of maybe moving towards that way. Now, I'm not specifically doing it for that. I would just like to be, if there's a defensive issue at the club or wherever I might be, I want to be that person that people come to pick my brain, because I really enjoy it. So why can't I help other people sort of understand defending a bit more?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And the breakdown that we're kind of going through, like you said there, with American football, it does feel like we're moving quite closely to that space. Obviously now with set piece coaches and whatnot. I guess the question for me is, how do you go around managing the technical detail that you can give to defenders, and then with the age group that you're working with? I know that you've been fortunate enough to work across multiple age groups, etc. So how do you manage, going and getting an understanding of when to show inside and when to show outside, body shape, whether to be on front foot, back foot? How do you translate that to a 14, 15-year-old all the way down to 9, 10-year-old?
Not easily is probably the answer. So at Saints, I've worked normally in the coaching pathway, you work age groups up. For some reason, I'll let people be the judge. I've gone the other way. Actually, I've really found a passion for working with youngsters, now doing the under 10s. Probably because football is so raw. There isn't, although I love detail, I'm able to impart on that detail for them. So in my practices at the moment, it's really about where you show players and why. I'm not particularly, I don't know if I have a view on really coaching defensive detail or technical detail at the lower ages, because at those ages the kids are finding their own profile. For example, defensively, I'll give an example. Lots of people will talk about when you defend like side on, for example. When the player takes you down the line, for example, in channel, should you cross your feet over or look shuffle really quickly, like side to side? And for me, I was a crossover player because I could pick up the speed really quickly. Now, some people like Ashley Cole, he talks about matching people's feet. That's probably why he probably played at the top level. Let's argue that. But he talks about matching feet and stepping really quickly. Now, I think it's really nice for players to sort of find their rhythm and find their way of how they want to do it. So I can think of players in my team already that sort of show one way, or they are side on a particular direction because it's more comfortable for them. And then it's my job to sort of not mold them into a certain way, but really perfect and how they can have their own style and their own defending. Now, under 10s, it's pretty much in these sort of scenarios, try and keep them away from the goal. In these scenarios, you might actually show them towards bodies and where, you know, the less priority spaces or players. I really like the fact that some players you can really go into a lot of detail with, and other players are pretty much just like, let me go figure it out. And then sort of finding those ways to engage them, whether that be with some video stuff or just with a talk after the session. Whereas some players really like a stop, stand still, think about maybe shifting your body weight, or shifting, not meaning your body, maybe shifting your body 1 yard this way to really overemphasize pushing them down the line because you're a really quick player. You might actually say to the player, go on, take me down the line. I'll be there to catch you. Whereas a slower player, I'm probably going to look to critique them or coach them a little bit differently. You can have that really individualized stance on coaching.
So I'm going to pick up on something you said there regarding the defending out wide thing, because I've got some viewpoints on this, which we can go to in a minute. But if you're looking at, regardless of what footwork patterns the individual uses to match the crosser, what would you say are some of the key factors that people need to, the defenders need to do or need to have in order to either block the cross or potentially go and win the ball back?
I think patience is quite a nice one. Like, I think people are probably too eager to win the ball back, especially sort of in your own half. Now, actually, you probably could relate that to in the attacking half as well, because it's not often that actually the first defender wins the ball. It's normally the second, which is quite interesting. But I think to block across, you're probably looking at I think your body shape's a sort of a big one. Now, I've recently watched something on basketball where they speak about this side-on approach, as it were. It's really hard to run if your body's sideways. You can't really do it, but twisting your torso to actually the direction that you want to. So twisting your torso to where the player is, but keeping your legs in a direction that you want to run in. And that was something I probably never really thought about. That actually makes a load of sense. That you put your legs where you want to run, you're probably going to run there. Whereas we talk a lot about kids being side on and shuffling and whatnot like that. So that's probably something to think about, is where your legs are going. So if you're looking to cut a player off, your legs are probably going to look across that line. Your torso can sort of shape them where you want them to go. I think your legs are going to be the things that get you there first. I think having a knowledge of timing, so that bit of patience, or when to know when to tackle. It could be an opportunity to nick the ball straight away. Now, if you do nick the ball straight away, are you really in a position to go and attack if for example, if there's only you versus 4 players? Whereas if you wait another couple of steps, then actually you might be a bit tougher to win the ball back. But if you win the ball back, your players are in a better position for you to go and win it. So knowledge of knowing and the timing of when to tackle is something big. Which foot to actually block with? Now that's a debate. Are you a crossover? If it's going down one wing, and are you the nearest foot, or you let the other foot to sort of stick your leg out? And that's a tough one. And I personally am not sure if you can coach which leg to go with. It all happens in a split second. So that sort of stuff I'm sort of really working out. What scenarios work best for which foot to block with? Probably, yeah, timing and patience are quite big for me. And I say probably direction of where your legs are going. That probably sounds really strange speaking about it. If I was to show what it looks like, it's a lot simpler, and hopefully I'll be able to find the basketball clip I found on Twitter and post that.
So it's really interesting what you said there regarding the which foot to go with, because this has been a topic of conversation that I've probably had over the last 2 years with people. So you mentioned that kind of for you, there isn't any set way. So if I ask the first question, what was your personal preference? And then why do you say that there's no set way? Or why do you think there's no set way?
I think if I think back, I was probably a crossover. So, for example, if I was playing left back, I would probably defend with my right foot outside to block across. Now, the one bad thing, which I sort of realised, that was my natural way to do it. But what I quickly sort of realised when I'm playing against a quicker player, is if actually that would be my backward leg. If that leg is actually in the air looking to block, I can't push off to accelerate. So I sort of had to quickly, that was probably when I got into that pro game. We're talking like real detail. So that took me a little while to actually to sort of realise, or maybe if I block with my, in this example, my left leg, if he does fake or he takes another touch, my back leg can then push me to go again. So in that, I would maybe argue that, what would it be? It'd be you're facing that way, whatever side of the pitch you're playing on, that leg would sort of maybe block, maybe. It was, for some reason, I just got a lot of success with my outside foot. Now, I think it probably comes from, now, tackling. There's two ways to tackle, I think, and that being you're either tackling to dispossess the player or you're tackling to get the ball back, and I class those as different. So it might be that actually I'm going to tackle you to get the ball into no man's land, stop you doing something, get the ball out of play, let us recover. Or I'm looking to actually tackle you to regain possession of the ball for myself or my team. Now that's where you talk about differently. So I got a lot of success actually from if a player's on the side of me, tackling with my closest foot, hook the ball, so that I can then take possession of the ball. Rather, I might be a smash with my other foot, come through the player to take them out, then tackle. I think that's different. So there's probably an argument there that what is your actual goal of why you're tackling? And that's probably something that's not coached, really. I don't think that even answers your question, to be honest, Mike.
Yeah, no, it does. So I think for me, I agree with you. That's what I used to do as well. And the theory I have behind it is if I'm playing, let's use the left back example you gave there. Left back, we're both running back towards our byline. I would go and try and block with my right foot, which is the closest to the player, because I felt as though I could get closer to the ball. So in terms of actually trying to stop the cross itself, if it is a cross, I can get closer to the ball by doing that. The distance that I can close over that period of time is closer. And if they did try and cut back inside, I backed myself that I was probably strong enough upper body wise to give them a little nudge, if you like, or pull in the same direction so they kept going line. I think that the conversation I've had with a lot of people is around what you said there, which is if they do get you to go and then you have to try and accelerate off, either you've got to turn your back because you're trying to push and then spin round, or you're just going to be in a world of trouble because you're not physically going to be able to turn, which I do understand. But I agree with you too, and I think that it is a personal preference thing and probably relates slightly to your body type and what you physically feel like you're capable of doing and what you're comfortable with doing. I look at someone like Wan-Bissaka, for example. Every coaching manual tells you not to do sliding tackles because it takes you out of the game. And he does he does like 5 or 6 slide tackles every game. Yeah. But how often does he lose a 1v1 duel in wider areas? Mm-hmm. And I listened to a book called I can't remember what it's called. It was about Bill Belichick, the New England Patriots coach. And they were talking about the work they were doing with a punter, and they do it off timing. So they want the punters to be able to get the ball, get rid of the ball within 2 seconds. And this punter wasn't doing the footwork pattern that they'd suggested, etc. And that his dad or the coach has said to him, well, how long does he get rid of the ball in? And he went 2 seconds. He said, so that player has found a way to do it his own style, but gets the results that you want, right? And he was like, yeah. He goes, well, leave him alone then. He said, why are you complicating it? Because everyone thinks you should have a 2-step rather than a 3 if it gets the results you want. And I think that sometimes we forget that with kids and adult players, that sometimes people just have ways in which they're going to complete a task that isn't maybe the norm or the manuscript, but is effective. So actually, do we need to overcoach them in that environment, or do we just say, you know what, they're good at that, let's upskill the other bits so that if they play someone who exposes that they've got this other base level, but let them do it the way that they want to do it, because actually they're finding success in doing it that way.
Exactly. I think as coaches, arguably or indirectly, you probably think it's about you. Oh, I'm coaching, so it's about what I want to deliver. I don't think it is. I think it's about what the players present to you. So, like for example, if an on the ball example is Thiago Alcantara or Nemanja Matic, they receive their back to their centre backs or defence 9 times out of 10, and have a fake and outside the foot touch to roll. How often are you taught as a number 4 or midfield player? No, you've got to have your body shape open to receive to go forwards. Always. Now, I think there's definitely a time and place. There's definitely a time where you go, that's actually the quickest way to get there. But Thiago's arguably the best in the world in bringing people close to them, fake and go around them and explode. So why would you not use that to your advantage? It's probably actually more challenging to coach them out of that than it is to make that super skill. But yeah, defending wise, I was probably always the closest foot, as you say, and I was very much an arm defender. There's not a lot of times that if I got my arm out, that anybody would have regardless of size, was beating me with that. And when you speak about where you don't want to get your back turned, I probably take pride in the fact that I had good spatial awareness. So I knew that if I don't get this player to go where I want them, or we've got too much space on both sides of me, then they're probably going to twist and turn me. So I was actually quite good at overemphasizing where I wanted players to go. Now, some coaches thought that was maybe too far. But what they didn't realise was that I was pushing players to where I need them to go win the ball, maybe 2 seconds later than they originally want. Because I wouldn't say I was the quick. I'm not slow, but I wasn't like, we're talking like really, really, really quick as a fullback or anything like that. But what I did do was those 2 seconds with that bit of patience was I allowed my team to get back into positions better. If they do cross it, they can win it easier. Whereas if I try and win the ball back really early, or they twist and turn me, then I'm probably going to be in a load of bother, and so are they. So I do think there is an art defending, and that's sort of what I'm going through at the moment. I wish I had more answers for you.
No, for me, I always bring this to a level of predictability as well. One of the reasons I quite like a one-man press is because it does make it predictable for your back players. If you're able to show the ball down one side, it provides potentially a level of predictability of where the ball's going. And as a defender, I love that. I back myself that if I know where the ball's going to go, I'll be able to time my interception or time my clearance. And what you're saying there regarding, I might overemphasize one way. Well, at least if they do get a cross in, we know exactly where that cross is coming from. So your goalkeeper, your centre backs, your other fullback go, okay, well, we're set up here. The one that kills you is when you're all set up, he chops inside and then whips it for someone running in late, and you're like, well, we're set up, we're in a world of trouble and that. So for me, I think that, I agree with you. It sounds like quite similar. And a good example of what you said around arm defending is Davinson Sanchez plays against Adama Traore a couple of weeks ago. And listen, Adama Traore is ridiculous. I was hoping Tottenham were going to sign him, but it was interesting. He went against Tanganga a few times, and obviously young defender, very athletic, but at times struggle. Sanchez got close to him, and Traore's tried to go inside, and Sanchez has just gone, no, you're all right. And has literally got his arm out straight around his waist, and Traore can't move. And it's the first time I've seen someone do that to him, but I was like, okay, that's like a player identifying his super strength is that I'm physically very imposing, and I've backed myself 1v1. So it'd be interesting to see, like, he's had a good start to season, if that is the case moving forward and people identifying those super strengths and using them.
Definitely. I love, obviously, you're getting me going about defending. I love figuring out problems. I love figuring them out. Anything like puzzles or anything like that, I'm all over. And now when I'm tactically, when I was as a centre half, now people say that playing centre half was really boring. I love it. Although I'm not on the ball, I love working out where the ball should go in terms of if we're on the ball. Also, when they're attacking us, I've got to make decisions really, really quickly and how to talk to my teammates and organise. And I love that. And I really, now at Millwall, I was arguably not what you think of as a typical Millwall player, although I could be, as you described, combative and making last ditch challenges and things like that. And I probably wasn't noticed as much as what I thought I was going to be or should have been. But I love thinking ahead. I love the thinking ahead of time where the ball's going to go. And my trait was, I know the ball's going to go in behind me or go in a certain area. I was already there to intercept, or I'm standing in that space already. Now, as a coach, that's something that's difficult, or it's something that's maybe not seen by coaches, or it's the fact that you don't recognise players standing in spaces to stop the ball going there. And that's an art in itself, is prioritising space over man or goal or whatever it might be. That's what I used to love, was alongside my heading and taking in the nose and whatnot, things like that. Definitely figuring out the problems and defending and how we can improve and everything like that. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it sounds like we had a similar game, Keats, because that's what my thing was. I pride myself on being able to play kind of anywhere across the back four. So I remember plenty of games where I'd come off and I've played centre back, right back, left back, because of where they've made changes. Like, right, you're playing here now, you're playing there now. Now, I wouldn't say I was the best player in the world, and happy to admit that.
It sometimes works in your favour to be versatile, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So it worked for me that, as you say, you had loads of positions. Although I've predominantly played left side centre half, because I've been both footed. The con of it is you're not nailed down. So there could always be somebody that, if there's a solid left side centre half, I was arguably always the one that would have to move. Now, 9 times out of 10, I would go and move whoever out of position. But sometimes you might get that player that comes in and just goes, yeah, this is where they're going to play now, and you have to go, oh, right, okay, I have to learn something else. I enjoyed that. I love the different problems that different positions gave you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess the question I have at the moment, and it's off the back of watching the cricket, actually, watching England versus India, which is, how do we prepare players to either play in different climates, or could we learn better in other cultures? So obviously, having spoken to some people internally that used to work in cricket, that they mentioned that, we send players to Australia for summers or winters or whatnot. The Lions teams will go and tour in subcontinents, etc. For me, in a football context, I always wonder whether the EPPP system now is breeding a lot of very good ball playing defenders, which, players being more comfortable on the ball is great. What would happen if 17s for half a season we had an individual who went out and played in Italy?
Yeah, I think I always, when you're in the game or in like the program as a player, at 18 to 20, you never go out on loan. You rarely do you say, if you're a 16-year-old in that scholarship year, you go out on loan. Now, who you might imagine to go out on loan, that's a different kettle of fish. I do think there's scope of just sending players to non-league clubs or different areas of the world. I think it's great. It could even be just changing your training environment. So, like, we sometimes go to goals a lot at Saints, and that brings a whole different environment out to it. Of if I'm loving defending, there's nothing better than 5v5 in a cage. Now, with 9 and 10-year-olds, you've got to be careful of them hitting the fence and stuff. I do sort of say to parents, like, it's going to be a bit gritty. Your kid might get shoved up against the wall, and they might get hurt, but it is safe, and they've got to learn that. So I definitely think there is scope for sending people out. I do think you've got to be, if you can imagine being 17 years old, going out to another country on your own could be, quite daunting. So as long as the level of support is there, then I don't see why it wouldn't be beneficial. Maybe however long that might be is down to the club, but I would have loved it as a youngster.
I just think the cultural side of it as well, like, I know you can say it's stereotypical, but you talk about like the Spanish and how composed they are on the ball and how they want to play. And if we've got a centre back who's physically imposing and maybe need to work on that, for them to have to go and be in a culture that's the paramount, that's the thing that you have to be able to do. So coaches may have different ways of working with individuals to improve that, or the type of game might force them to become more comfortable. In Italy, it is, like ultimately Bonucci and Chiellini over the Euros was a masterclass of 36, 37, 38, 39, or whatever they are, understanding the dark arts of defending and doing what they need to do win. The foul on Saka is a perfect example of that. I saw a lot of people that maybe don't watch football saying, that should be a red card. Whereas for me, as a defender, I'm going, he's done what he needed to do. He's realised he's made a mistake and gone, okay, I'm going to take one for the team here. Worst case, it's probably going to be a yellow. Even if it's a red, it's last minute. I've done what I need to do. And I think that sometimes culturally, whilst it would be a challenge for a 17-year-old to go abroad and, the challenges that brings, would ingrain them in a culture that values those skill sets that are different to what we do here, increase that learning journey? Would it really would you see a kick of it?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I always wanted as a youngster to go and play in Italy for the sake of the defending. They just produce defenders. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Italy, the Italian style of football is my favourite, but the defending, you can't fault their defending. Always wanted to go into like Germany or Scandinavia as well, because they're just combative with them and without the ball. I definitely think there is scope there to do that. Definitely, it is an interesting point, and I think you could maybe have some tinted glasses if you see something and you can't quite get into it. Your ego might come in and go, "Oh, I can't coach that specifically. We've tried this, and this. What haven't we tried? We haven't actually tried sending them to the experts or somewhere. Why not? If you've got the budget to be able to do that and the facilities and the capability to do that, why not?"
I think it's session design as well, like, and session things that you said there that, we the younger age groups might place an emphasis on doing moves. That might be completely different to what they would do in those countries. They're going to work on, we're going to defend first, and if you get to attack off the back of it, that's brilliant. So just how session designs may change over that 3-month, 6-month period might just adjust your thinking. And again, it would improve you holistically if you've got to learn how to cook for yourself, you've got to embed yourself in a new culture and whatnot. For me, I just think if you've got the money to do it, it would be a really interesting way of doing it.
I remember just going over to Inter. I went on there like a 3-day tour about maybe 4 years ago or so. They most of the time in their training, they trained with maybe arguably 4 cones, 5 cones. That was it, because the players knew where they needed to stand and what the coach was looking for. So an example of this was like in England, and I'm not a huge fan of it. And I found it so boring. But the old passing diamond, I can't. I can understand it as like a warm up thing. I totally get it, but I don't know if it teaches all that much. If I'm being brutally honest. And in Italy, sort of similar to the Barcelona thing about the mannequins. Like, why would you go and stand and mark yourself against a mannequin and then push off? So I always speak to my attackers or people on the ball about, if you've got a line of four defenders in front of you, what do you see? They always say 4 defenders, but I say no, you've got to see the space. So you've got to see space around players, between the players, in front and in behind. If you just switch that mindset as a coach of what is it you're looking for, then it might help. So going back to the Inter, like looking at these kids, knowing these passing patterns with only 4 cones on the pitch, knowing where they need to stand. Whereas in England, we use cones as a mark of where to go. Actually, in Italy, it was a case of you've got to play around these cones, like, and the pattern was just it looked to be ingrained from a very young age.
Yeah, so talking about session design, one of the reasons that kind of wanted to get you on here is I know you've done a lot of work on 1v1s and trying to make it, I guess, realistic to the game, and also looking at how we can turn it into 1v2s or 1v3s, etc. So do you just want to talk about some of the work you've done on that and then how you relate that to what the players need in their development?
Yeah, so it was something that I found really challenging, probably still do, as I've already alluded to. But myself and a fellow coach a couple of years ago sort of got into, okay, we talk about 1v1s a lot. Now, how can we really make these specific to playing positions and really what we want? Now, in the younger years, 1v1s are all geared around a lot on skill that the person on the ball wants to use, which is fantastic, and kids to, you know, be at one with the ball and try different things, which is fantastic. And as you move towards the older, sort of the age group that we sort of had at 12, is we sort of, now I'll appreciate, I'll give him the credit, it was his idea. And it was maybe around not specifically what moves you want to occur, but what pressures are on you. So we sort of shifted our thinking into, okay, what does the pressure look like and why? So what I mean by pressure is is it pressure from a player? Is it a pressure from space, so restricting space, whether that be on the byline, just condensing space, so the space in the centre of the pitch looks completely different to what it looks like out wide. Time of the game, 1v1 will look very different if it compared to the middle of the game to maybe the 89th minute. And then the really simple of pressure of where is the goal. And then what other examples are there? Where the defender's coming from. So is it that they're coming straight in front of you? Is it that they're coming from the side, from behind, which is probably something that 1v1s you don't often see. It's a sort of recovering 1v1. That was sort of what we wanted. And then we sort of moved into, okay, what players in our team do we want to look at? Sort of what positions? And what we used to do is turn up. We knew the idea of what pressures we wanted. We turn up and go, okay, go stand as a centre half. If we're looking centre half versus striker, where you want to go and sort of, you know, defend, as it were. So I go stand, where I would play the ball, where I would look, and we would then cone out an area of the pitch where, if we're looking at specific around, go back to defending as we are at the moment, is we're looking for the centre half to force play wide. The pressure is going to be you're going to be in front of the attacker, as it were. So you're probably looking to shift the play one way. So actually, you're looking to be like offset. So your pitch isn't going to be in the middle. It's probably going to look to be sort of offset to one side. Now, then you talk about the direction of where the ball's going to come from. So if the player's probably coming at you from a wide position, you probably want to give a bit more space on your outside shoulder because the goal's probably inside you. So you look at that. Whereas if it's probably coming straight at you, you could argue that, okay, you make it a bit more elongated, but you stand the defender in the middle so that the player can go one way or the other. And then we sort of moved into, okay, how do you want to constrain it? Is it that you've only got 2 seconds to go score, or however long it might, probably not 2 seconds, but however long it might be, depending on the type. And then I sort of threw in a lot of, okay, we always do a 1v1 where it's sort of maybe a little pass as like a trigger for the receiver to then receive. And then you engage in your 1v1. Now, I sort of argue that at the older age groups, that very rare. When you're going to see a 3-yard pass, then you go and engage the defending. What I said was, why don't you start with like maybe a passing pattern further up, or a rondo, or a possession base? As soon as you achieve what you want to achieve, passing or score a goal or whatever, you then break out into a bigger passing pattern. And whilst that's already going on, your 1v1 defender is already looking where they stand on the pitch. They pressing up the pitch, they pressing down the pitch, and then as soon as that person engages into their area, the ball might be a rubbish ball that's really slow. So as a trigger, as we always say in defending, you can go high. But actually, that ball might come out fizzed, or you might be playing against somebody quick, and they might receive the ball on the move. And already, you give them 10 yards space in front, if that ball's already in front of them from like the rondo pass out, and they're then receiving that at top speed, the space you've got to defend isn't 10 yards. It might only be 5-6 yards instead. So you've got to make those decisions quicker. We then always toyed around, okay, scoring system, what do you do? Is it a run over the line? Is it a stop the ball on the line? Is it a big goal? Is it a mini goal? And we sort of toyed around what sort of worked best in all areas of the pitch. And if we're honest, having a big goal worked anyway. It gave that more intensity. I think it's more realistic if you put a goal in that. I know it's a buzzword and realism, but kids just want to really, although how much as I love defending, if I see a goal, I can't help but want to go and score and smash it in the back of the net. Now, you might get the argument of, if you're in that wide left-hand position, as we've spoken about already, where do you put, you don't put the goal up where the goal is. Your goal might not be an essential goal of a traditional goal that is in the middle of the pitch. You might put it that actually attacker you're looking to cross. Your goal is actually to cross the ball here, and you cross it how you would cross it. Now, teaching that to the players was challenging because whenever a kid sees a mini goal or a goal, you usually say, I want you to pass it into the net. They're not passing it, they're smashing it. So that took a bit longer. And I think with the older players, it worked. They understood about, we're not looking to score a goal, we're looking to cross, or we're looking to pass through the line, something like that. Hopefully that explains sort of like the process what we went through. And then we sort of then looked, maybe go, okay, why don't you do that? You could take it then one step further, and you have possession rondo, you have your 1v1 in the middle, and actually it's not just cross, and you have a bit of free play at the end. It works into 3 sections. And that was something we didn't really get around to. How do you work that in? Obviously, for all of that, you need a lot of players, and people might not be privileged to that. But I think any coach can work with, where do you position the goal, what area of the pitch you're doing it on, and where is the pressure coming from, and what do you want to achieve? And if you consider those things, I think you're onto a winner. And then it's down to personal preference of who you put in there against who. So we were very big on matching people with what we want to get out. So if it's a kid that's maybe physically not as imposing, knowing the challenge and support model we've got, saying, okay, and I guess the well-being of the player at that time, we put them up against somebody who's going to, challenge him really bad or really hard, I should say, or is it that we team them up against somebody that maybe matches them to see who comes out on top? And that's the individualised of knowing your players. But it was a really interesting process working around moving from what you want the person on the ball to achieve rather than where the pressure is.
Yeah, I think the where the pressure is coming from is a really big one, as you said. And how often do we do work with players receiving with pressure directly behind, or recovering defenders, or what that looks like? I know, having seen the clip of Lukaku and Jamie Carragher has been resurfaced recently about Lukaku saying how he would do. But I think whilst that's like obviously a former player against a current player and stuff, it's a really interesting clip to show you, like, if we did more of that, defenders would have more skills how to compensate against someone Lukaku. So like, if you're talking about the disparity between smaller players and bigger players, well, have we got this player at the moment that finds it physically challenging to play against these individuals? So how are we going to teach him these skills? Are we going to put him up against Lukaku where he's just going to get rolled and bashed every time? Or are we going to match him up where potentially he can actually work on him with some success and some failure? So I think that idea of theming it around what the individual needs are, and then obviously where the pressure is really, really good. And also, like you said, around the goals, it's a really interesting concept of not having it on where the goal would be, maybe having it as like we all talk about second 6-yard box. Well, can we get a goal in that second 6-yard box and work on them crossing the ball into that from the wide areas? And you get obviously certain points from it. In terms of for you as coaches, what outcomes did you see? Was there anything particularly that stood out after going through this piece of work?
Obviously, as I said, sort of mentioned the goal thing already. You just got more emphasis from attackers to want to probably make it quicker, more intense, and that was really interesting to see. And then I guess you could take it one step further and actually don't put a goal in there. You actually just put a scorer in. What does that then do? We didn't really quite get onto that. So that was good to see. And we saw the level of competitiveness just rise. So those players, and I think we were really skillful in matching players up. I think that's really, really important. And it's matching them up, whether that be for their super strength, you're trying to, really help with that with, or you're really looking to challenge them, knowing why you're doing something and them knowing why they're doing it and understand, because kids aren't stupid. They know why you're matching them up against somebody who's maybe bigger than them. You don't have to say anything, but they know. It was really good to see the level of competition just rise in the group. And as young children, they love competition. Now, I always have the argument that football doesn't need to be competitive. It is an art. It doesn't need to be competitive, but by nature it is. How do you, in that competitive environment, bring out the patience, the flow of the game? But it was really good to see that as youngsters, they really enjoyed the variety of what pressure looked like, because as you mentioned there, that one about, okay, big lad go up against a small lad, just go stand on him. Now, small kids can have to learn about not being pinned, and then things like that. So it's interesting though how they do that and figure that out. And it was good to see which players could figure out problems. Now, in the moment, figure out what's happening in that moment, which was nice to see. So if they're being pinned, okay, I need to maybe not be pinned. How do I do that in that moment? But you also see the kid that just turns up and just does what's asked of them and doesn't do anything different. So there you might have a potential thing go and think about, okay, have you thought about doing this, thought about doing that? So you have a bit more coaching there. But then also you've got the kid that might just try something. You don't need to coach them. And then it's their turn to have a break. They're already thinking about the next one around what they did good, what they didn't do well. I'm going to try this next time, which was nice, and that sort of relates to. I don't know if anyone saw, but in the Olympics, you got was it a Swedish pole vaulter? Can't quite remember. But every time she had a go, she would go into a notebook and write down what she did, how it went, and then for her next try, she would always focus on something to make it better. And you always see the kids that do that. So I appreciate the competitiveness went up. And just the environment, they enjoyed the environment of the variety, and then which kids were more problem solvers and which kids probably, were complacent or relaxed.
I think that's a really interesting one, because we talk about wanting to produce good decision makers or good problem solvers. And my opinion is they're not always necessarily your best player.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that sometimes those that are able to solve the problems the quickest maybe have to out of necessity at times. Now, that may not always be the case, but I think someone who's naturally good and can dribble past 4, 5, 6 players, if they've got that skill, that gets them out of trouble a lot of the time. Whereas actually someone who isn't able to do that, they have to solve problems of how to combine, or they have to solve problems of where that first touch needs to go to protect the ball, because otherwise there's a lot of failure. Is that something that you would agree with from the work that you'd seen?
Yeah, definitely. I can relate that to my own experience. Was, as I say, I'm 6 foot, so not like the biggest centre half, and you can play against massive people, both tall and wider than me. What I quickly had to learn was, if I'm being pinned, how am I being pinned? Well, obviously I must be standing still too much. And I started to figure out, if I start to stand on this shoulder of the person in this sort of scenario, the striker might follow me to pin me. But actually, I know the ball's going to go into over here. As soon as they come over here, I've dragged them this way. I'm looking to already go here. So already looking to keep on the move. And that sort of brings out things like timing. So I move over this second, I move in this direction, the ball might already be there and I might already be out of it. Or if I look to step really early or drop really early, that might do something else. I definitely think that allowing kids to figure out problems is good. I think the skill of the coach is knowing when to help them, when not to help them. And that's something that's massive at the moment. That coaching isn't always direct. It's very much let the practice do the talking, and then as and when you see fit, have a little bit of a word, or you might demonstrate or do something like that. That's something with my defending I'm really figuring out, because you go into a practice and a kid, after one go, their head might be completely gone. They don't want to do it because they don't like defending anyway. And that's natural, that's fine. Do I go in there and coach them with a load of detail around how to make it better? Do I make the practice easier? Do I put them up against somebody else? Those are really good like challenges for me as a coach. But then you've got a kid that, didn't have success on the first one, but they want to grind it out, figure it out. Now that kid I might just leave alone and let them do it, and then we'll play afterwards. But I always think that you need to connect the learning. So, I saw you did this 3 times ago. Do you remember? Yeah, I do. Have you thought about doing this? If you just leave them to figure it out by themselves, and not have a conversation with them at any one point, then I don't know if you've really, arguably, if you've done your job. If you've got a perfect coaching practice, then really there wouldn't be any need for a coach, would there? So there's got to be a time and place for a person to talk to a child, or vice versa, really.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think there always needs to be some support. It's just what that support looks like. And where do you see this bulk of work going? So what do you see the extension of this being? Obviously, it's a good work in terms of the diagnosis and analysis of it. What do you see as the next steps being as a challenge for the players, and how this can evolve further?
1v1s are probably massive at the moment, aren't they? They're like arguably the best thing to work with in football. They're like that's like the buzzword, isn't it? What we're, especially the environments that I've been in, or argue most of the Saints, but we're losing. Coaches always talk about the technique of the game, whether that be passing or finishing. So I think practices maybe looking at how you connect the 1v1s patterns is going to be quite interesting. So I've already sort of alluded to about I tend to maybe connect a passing pattern or a finishing pattern into a 1v1, so that you couldn't tell if they're working on their passing, if they're working on their 1v1, or working on their finishing. Obviously that comes with cons, like they're not going to get as much repetition or anything like that, but arguably if you work on your practice being effective enough, then there's all that whole argument on quality over quantity, isn't there? So that's personally where I've looked to evolve my practices, is connecting different practices together, so that arguably it might then free up space for other stuff, for more practices, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, no, it does. It 100% does.
Yeah.
Right. Last question from me. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you probably know where I'm going with this. But who is either the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Best player
you can't say me. I know we've played 5-a-sides and stuff. You just take me as red, and then kind of go from there.
Oh, that takes away my answer, I think. Best player I've worked with, and why? I don't really.
Or
know.
coach, so it can be a coach.
I'll go with a coach. That's probably where I identify myself at the moment. But I would probably. He had quite a big impact on me when I sort of started off as my coach. I'll probably say it was a coach called Tony Salantino at Saints. Now, I'm not saying he's like the best coach I've ever completely worked with. He made a big impact on me, and by that I mean that as a coach, you've got to have emotional connection to people, and that's probably something that, although I love helping people, my empathy and things like that was always tough. And working with children, it's not a great thing. But working with him and his culture, being of an Italian background, it was really nice to see how he connected people through his own voice, his gestures, and his coaching behaviour. And that's something that, you asked me that question, what is coaching at 5 years ago, I would have said, it's putting on practices and getting the best out of football. I've evolved that into it certainly isn't. I would probably say that my job is maybe 30% coaching football and 70% actually dealing with players and people, or people first. And I think he was absolutely excellent at that. So I know he's got a good shout out there.
Perfect. Yeah. Obviously knowing Tone, I agree with you. He's very big on the holistic side and getting to know the people and stuff, which is great. But Keats, listen, really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.